What you want to avoid is to know a piece of information only by the place it is in on your study sheet. Memorizing things, it's much harder than actually understanding things. So whenever you read through your study guide again, think about what is the kind of question that I may be asked here and what would my answer be. Hi guys, welcome back to Vlogmas. This is really weird filming like this with nothing in the back. I'm sorry, we're still not set up in our apartment. It's white walls mostly everywhere. Alexus is already in LA, so it's only me today, but for this Vlogmas episode, I want to tell you guys my best study tips. I'm a PhD student at University of Hawai'i at Mānoa in second language studies, and it's my last year, hopefully, almost, maybe, but I'm done with all my exams. No exams for the rest of my life. We'll see. But I think having written and having had so many exams, I really know the best way for me to approach them, and hopefully it can help you guys too. So I came up with 5 tips that I want to share with you guys who are hopefully only starting to take exams in college and who want to have a head start on how to best deal with these kinds of exams. Okay, my very first tip for you guys. Considering that college exams are much larger in size, just in information that you need to cram, compared to high school exams, you need a good memorization technique. And one of the best memorization techniques out there is called spaced repetition. You might have heard of it before. It's a scientifically proven method to memorize large chunks of information and to keep them in your long-term memory. Now, spaced repetition works kind of like this. You practice something once, the next day you try to go over it again in your head. You probably still remember it from the day before. Now, if you do the same the next day and the next day and the next day, you probably have a good idea of what you were trying to memorize. But you'll forget if you don't keep memorizing them. Because every day that you go through them, it gets easier. It gets easier and easier for you to recall them. Now, if you do something called spaced repetition, which means you space out for longer and longer and longer and longer chunks of time your repetition, it'll be harder for you to recall the things. Now, this being harder results in your mind building even stronger bonds between the chunks of information that you have. Now, let's say I memorized something today, I practice it again tomorrow, I could recall it just fine. Now, if I did it tomorrow, it'd be too easy. I just wait a day, do it the day after. Now, it's already a little bit more difficult than if I had done it the day before, so this higher difficulty leads my brain to build a stronger bridge to that kind of information. Now, after that, I wait 3 days maybe, or 2 days in between. With that, it's more difficult again. And you get the point, the more difficult it becomes, the stronger the relationships that my brain builds between the kinds of information. So that's a very simplified explanation of spaced repetition, but it really makes sense. And it can help you guys study, because if you want to study or if you have different topics that you're studying, you can study one topic one day and the next day, and then you can bring in another topic that you study, and then the day after, it'll be more difficult to recall the first topic, but it should still be possible. And if you do that, it'll be more difficult for your brain to recall it, and it'll make a stronger connection to it. So that's spaced repetition for you guys. My study tip number 2, though, is very related to this. You know how I was talking about making connections between different information, how the brain builds connections and relationships? That's really how we learn. So study tip number 2 is to encourage making those connections, not only between the things that you're studying that are on your study sheet or on your study guide, but also between the things that are on your study guide and other things. And not only within topics, but also across topics. So the way you can do this, and maybe the easiest way to do this, is to write down your topics on flashcards that are movable, or write them down digitally, where you can still move the parts that you wrote down. Because what you can do is write down your study guide or write down everything that you need to know, and then you start thinking about it. How does this topic what does this topic have to do with this topic? Are there any things within these topics that kind of relate to each other, that depend on each other, that affect each other? Any kind of relationship. And then whether you have flashcards and you can put it on a big poster or on a whiteboard and maybe draw arrows or lines in between, or whether you have it digitally and you can move things around and then draw arrows or lines there and annotate those. Doesn't matter, as long as you can somehow rearrange chunks of information. Because come the next day, you can think about other ways to arrange them. Maybe you can put them in a nice flow chart. Maybe you can put them into a different kind of chart that makes sense to you. Maybe you can take out just parts of each topic that could make a new topic. The main goal here is really to build as many connections between different information as possible. The reason for that is that, as I said, that's how learning works. That's how our brain works. And information that is connected to many things is much more accessible to you as information that's only connected to the previous study point and the next study point on your study sheet, if that makes sense. It's like learning vocabulary words. Maybe when you were learning Spanish in high school or something, you remembered the word by which one it was above and which one it was below, but you don't see them in context much. So what you want to avoid is to know a piece of information only by the place it is in on your study sheet. You want to make other connections to that piece of information to help your recall. So now that we have that one down, study tip number 3. And as I'm talking through these, I'm realizing how connected they are, because study tip number 3 is to always ask why. For every single thing, every single topic that you're going through, every single bullet point that you're writing down, make sure you understand why things are the way they are. Because those things aren't always mentioned in lectures, or maybe you forgot that they were mentioned in the lecture, or it didn't really make sense to you back then. But the more complex the concept, the harder it is to understand if you don't understand the why behind it. If you don't understand, where it comes from, what things are related to. So for example, if you're studying why the moon is sometimes full, sometimes half, sometimes small, sometimes big, and the only reason that you know why, or your bullet point, is that it is because of the Earth's shadow. This is difficult to remember if you don't realize it's because the light comes from behind Earth, then Earth is in the middle, and then it lights up the moon. Does that make sense? Maybe not, I don't know. But the important part is that whatever you're writing down, make sure you're asking, why is that so? And then if you have to research this, if it's not even in your study materials, you have to research it yourself. This helps you even further, because if there's a question about this one topic, you'll even remember what you searched up on Google, what you researched. You'll remember the explanations that you read through on the websites that you were going, in addition to your study guide. So memorizing things, it's much harder than actually understanding things. And then if there's a difficult question that doesn't only require you to recall the information, but also to do something with it, it's very, very likely that you'll need to know why things are the way they are. Otherwise, you won't be able to answer the question. Okay, so guys, don't forget to ask why. And then study tip number 4 for you guys, almost coming to the end, is to make sure you're practicing and researching what the format of the test is. You need to know if you're going to have to write an essay or if you're going to do a multiple choice test. You have to know whether you'll have to do the math or whether you have to decide which answer could be the correct one. All of those require different strategies, all of those require different kinds of knowledge, different complexities of knowledge. So make sure you ask your professor what format is the test going to be. Make sure you do your best to get sample quizzes, sample exams, and practice those. And then once you have that, study tip number 5 is to go through these kind of sample exam questions, mock exams in your head as much as you can. So whenever you read through your study guide again, think about what is the kind of question that I may be asked here and what would my answer be. So it's not enough to only recite what's on your study guide. You need to think about, if I was asked this is my answer. If I was asked to choose between these 3 things, this would be my answer. If I was asked to write an essay about this is how I would structure it. Because this kind of thought process is what you're going to have to do in the exam. You know, taking your information from your study guide into the kind of format that you need to produce. And if you can do it beforehand, you'll have a lot more time during the exam to actually do the things you're asked to do. So I hope that really helped you guys. If you have any other study tips that seem to be helpful to you, please let us know in the comments. Thank you guys so much for watching. Good luck on your quiz.